What if some of the horror movies now called masterpieces were once considered too dangerous for ordinary audiences? Some were cut, some faced angry censors, and others became famous partly because people were told not to watch them. Today, those same controversial movies are celebrated, collected, restored, and endlessly discussed by horror fans. Before we enter this forbidden corner of horror history, hit like, share this video with another classic horror fan, and subscribe to the channel. Number 20. Blood on Satan's Claw, 1971. Long before the phrase folk horror became fashionable, this strange British nightmare was already turning the peaceful countryside into something deeply unsettling. Set in rural England during the 1700s, the story begins when a farmer discovers a mysterious object buried in a field. Soon, the young people of the village begin behaving strangely, while fear spreads that an ancient evil may be influencing them. Patrick Wymark plays the judge who slowly realizes that ordinary superstition may not explain what is happening. The film became controversial because its quiet countryside setting suddenly gives way to disturbing rituals, violence, and adult material. British classification history reflects how challenging this kind of horror was for audiences at the time. One of its most remembered sequences involves the villagers gathering secretly as their behavior becomes increasingly sinister. Instead of relying on a traditional monster, the film suggests that evil has infected an entire community. Years later, that eerie atmosphere helped turn it into one of the defining cult films of British folk horror. Number 19. Witchfinder General, 1968. Nothing supernatural is required to make this movie frightening, because the real monster walks around dressed like a respectable man. Vincent Price stars as Matthew Hopkins, a historical figure who travels across Civil War-era England accusing people of witchcraft. Rather than presenting him as a magical villain, the movie shows a cold opportunist using fear, authority, and public panic to control communities. That grim realism made the film unusually harsh for the late 1960s. The BFFC still describes it as a historical horror drama, containing strong violence and execution scenes. The most famous moments are not supernatural attacks, but confrontations, in which innocent people realize that logic will not save them. Ian Ogilvy's character gradually becomes obsessed with stopping Hopkins, turning the film into both horror story and revenge tragedy. Price was famous for colorful Gothic villains, but here he is frightening because he barely raises his voice. What once seemed almost excessively bleak now looks remarkably modern, and its reputation has grown far beyond its original exploitation-style marketing. If you enjoy discovering the movies censors feared, but audiences eventually turned into classics, make sure you're subscribed. And share this countdown with someone who thinks old horror movies were always tame, because we're just getting started. Number 18. The Brood, 1979. Imagine taking the anger from a collapsing marriage and somehow giving that anger a physical form. David Cronenberg basically built an entire nightmare around that idea. The story follows Frank Carveth, who becomes suspicious of the experimental therapy being used on his estranged wife, Nola. Her doctor believes emotional trauma can physically manifest itself, and soon mysterious childlike figures begin appearing whenever someone connected to Nola becomes a target. It sounds bizarre, but Cronenberg plays the family drama completely seriously. The movie was classified in Britain in 1979, and the BFFC continues to identify its strongest material as intense horror violence. Its most famous sequence arrives near the end, when Frank finally discovers exactly how Nola's emotions are connected to the strange creatures surrounding her. That revelation is disturbing not simply because of the effects, but because everything suddenly connects back to resentment, parenthood, and emotional damage. Critics were divided at first. Cult audiences were not. Today, The Brood is often viewed as one of Cronenberg's essential early films. Number 17. Phantasm, 1979. Very few horror movies feel like a nightmare you can almost understand but never completely explain. And that confusion is exactly what made this one unforgettable. Teenager Mike becomes suspicious after witnessing strange events around a local funeral home. His investigation leads him toward the mysterious tall man, played by Angus Scrimm, and a bizarre world of disappearing bodies, strange creatures, dimensional gateways, and floating metallic spheres. None of it behaves according to normal horror rules. The British classification record dates its cinema submission to 1979, during the period when the adult-only X certificate was still in use. The scene everybody remembers involves one of those silver spheres suddenly flying through the funeral home corridor and demonstrating that it is far more dangerous than it looks. But the tall man became the movie's true icon. His stiff movements, unnatural strength, and simple cry of, "Boy," gave horror fans a villain unlike almost anything else. Phantasm never became a conventional blockbuster. Instead, midnight screenings, home video, sequels, and devoted fans transformed it into pure cult cinema. Number 16. The Howling, 1981. By 1981, audiences thought they understood werewolf movies. Then Joe Dante arrived and made the transformation itself the main attraction. Dee Wallace plays television reporter Karen White, who travels to a secluded therapeutic community after surviving a frightening encounter with a dangerous man. Unfortunately, the peaceful retreat is hiding something far stranger than ordinary group therapy. People begin disappearing, strange cries fill the night, and Karen slowly realizes that the community may be populated by creatures capable of hiding in plain sight. The film reached British cinemas in 1981, with classification records noting its powerful transformation imagery and horror violence. Its legendary moment is the transformation of Eddie Quist. Instead of cutting away quickly, Dante forces viewers to watch the face and body change gradually through elaborate practical effects. That scene helped create an effects rivalry with another werewolf movie released the same year. Yet The Howling also had dark humor, media satire, and a strange final television broadcast that gave the ending an unforgettable punch. It remains one of the strangest creature feature cult favorites of its decade. Number 15. Zombie Flesh Eaters, 1979. Some movies build their reputation through awards. This one built its reputation through shocked audiences, censorship trouble, video stores, and scenes people simply could not forget. Lucio Fulci's film begins with an abandoned boat drifting into New York Harbor. The mystery eventually leads reporter Peter West and Ann Bowles toward a Caribbean island where the dead appear to be returning. From there, everything becomes increasingly nightmarish. British censors classified a cut version for cinemas in January 1980, while later releases restored material that had previously caused difficulty. Its most famous sequence may actually be the completely unexpected underwater encounter between a zombie and a shark. It is such a strange image that even people who have never watched the whole film often recognize it. Another notorious sequence involving a wooden splinter became part of horror history, although its power comes largely from Fulci, stretching the suspense almost beyond comfort. For years, censorship only made people more curious. Eventually, the film escaped its reputation as forbidden video store material and became one of the best-known cult examples of Italian zombie cinema. Number 14. The Burning, 1981. Before summer camps became completely overrun by masked horror villains, another badly injured figure was already waiting beside the lake. The story begins with a cruel prank at Camp Blackfoot that goes disastrously wrong. Years later, former caretaker Cropsey returns, carrying both physical scars and a desire to confront the people associated with what happened to him. What follows looks familiar today, because countless slashers copied similar ideas. British cinema censors required alterations when the film was classified in 1981, and later, home video versions also faced cuts. The sequence horror fans still discuss happens when several campers travel together on a raft. The apparently peaceful trip suddenly turns into the movie's showcase sequence, designed by effects artist Tom Savini. Yet The Burning is interesting for another reason. Its cast includes very early appearances from performers such as Holly Hunter, Jason Alexander, and Fisher Stevens. For years it lived in the shadow of Friday the 13th. Home video collectors eventually rescued it from obscurity, and today, it has the exact reputation producers probably wanted in 1981, an infamous campfire slasher people refuse to forget. Number 13. The Hills Have Eyes, 1977. A broken-down car is annoying. A broken-down car in the middle of an empty desert where somebody is watching you is the beginning of a nightmare. Wes Craven follows the Carter family as their road trip takes them through an isolated desert region. After becoming stranded, they discover another family living among the hills, and these residents have survived by following completely different rules. The movie becomes a brutal battle between two families, each becoming increasingly desperate. Its 1978 British cinema version received cuts during classification, demonstrating just how confrontational Craven's filmmaking appeared at the time. One of the movie's most famous stretches occurs when the attackers finally descend upon the Carters' trailer. The safety of the family vacation disappears almost instantly, and the survivors realize that waiting for rescue is no longer an option. What makes the ending memorable is how far the supposedly civilized characters are willing to go when survival becomes everything. Later horror movies copied the desert setting endlessly, but The Hills Have Eyes still feels nasty, dusty, unpredictable, and strangely believable, which explains why its cult reputation has survived. Number 12. An American Werewolf in London, 1981. How can a movie make you laugh at a conversation and then make you afraid to walk across a dark field 5 minutes later? John Landis somehow figured it out. American backpackers David and Jack are traveling through northern England when locals warn them to stay on the road. Naturally, things go terribly wrong. David survives an attack and wakes in a London hospital, but Jack begins appearing with increasingly alarming news. David may become a werewolf during the next full moon. The movie reached British cinemas in September 1981, during the final period of the old X classification system. Its famous transformation remains one of practical effects cinema's greatest showcases. David sits alone in an apartment as his body gradually changes while cheerful music plays in the background. Instead of hiding the transformation in darkness, Landis stages it under bright lights. There are also unforgettable dream sequences, ghostly conversations, and the chaotic finale around Piccadilly Circus. Audiences initially struggled with the combination of comedy and horror. That unusual mixture is exactly why the movie became so influential. Number 11. Don't Look Now, 1973. Grief becomes the monster in this movie, long before anything supernatural can be proven. Donald Sutherland and Julie Christie play John and Laura Baxter, a married couple attempting to rebuild their lives in Venice after the death of their young daughter. John is restoring an old church while Laura encounters two mysterious sisters, one of whom claims she can communicate with the dead. Soon, John begins noticing a small figure wearing the same red color associated with his daughter. The BPLIFC identifies the film as a 1973 mystery horror drama containing strong adult material, alongside violence and disturbing imagery. Its most famous visual is incredibly simple: a tiny red-coated figure disappearing around Venice's endless corners. Director Nicholas Roeg turns the beautiful city into a maze. Empty canals, dark passages, reflections, and strange editing make viewers question whether John is seeing a ghost, predicting the future, or simply being destroyed by grief. The final revelation lasts only moments, yet completely changes everything that came before. Once controversial, Don't Look Now is now celebrated precisely because it refused to behave like conventional horror. Number 10. The Wicker Man, 1973. At first, almost nothing on Summerisle looks frightening, and that is exactly why this movie works so well. Police Sergeant Neil Howie travels to the remote Scottish island after receiving a letter about a missing girl. The villagers insist she either never existed or has simply disappeared, but their answers never quite match. Howie, a deeply religious man, becomes increasingly disturbed by the island's pagan traditions and by the calm authority of Lord Summerisle, played by Christopher Lee. The BPAL-FC records Robin Hardy's 1973 film as horror, drama, and thriller, and its history belongs to the era when adult horror commonly carried Britain's X certificate. The movie spends most of its running time making Howie, and the audience, believe he is solving a mystery. Then comes the famous final procession. Suddenly, every strange conversation, missing photograph, unusual ritual, and apparently meaningless clue reveals its real purpose. The giant wooden figure on the hill has become one of horror cinema's most recognizable images, but Christopher Lee's calm expression may be even more unsettling. Summerisle never behaves like a wild villain. He believes completely in what he is doing. That confidence makes the ending terrifying. The original release was poorly handled and shortened, but rediscovered versions and decades of fan discussion transformed The Wicker Man into the ultimate folk horror cult classic. Number 9. Suspiria, 1977. Forget realistic horror for a moment. Dario Argento wanted this movie to feel like somebody trapped inside a beautiful nightmare. American dancer Susie Banyan arrives in Germany to study at a prestigious dance academy. On her first night, another student flees the building in terror. Strange illnesses, secret rooms, mysterious teachers, and unexplained events soon convince Susie that the academy is hiding something far older and more dangerous than strict dance instruction. The British cinema version was classified with cuts in July 1977, while later releases restored the film more fully. Its opening sequence became legendary almost immediately. A young woman leaves the academy during a violent storm, reaches another building, and discovers that whatever she was running from has followed her. Argento turns the entire sequence into a surreal explosion of red, blue, architecture, music, and terror. The soundtrack by Goblin is nearly as important as the actors. It whispers, screams, pounds, and sometimes seems to attack the audience. Eventually, Susie discovers hidden passages and learns the truth about the Academy's director. Plot is almost secondary, however. Suspiria became a cult classic because it looks and sounds like nothing else. Even decades later, one frame is often enough to identify it. Number 8. Halloween, 1978. The scary part is not that Michael Myers runs after people. It is that he almost never needs to run. John Carpenter's low-budget masterpiece follows Laurie Strode, a quiet teenager spending Halloween night babysitting in Haddonfield, Illinois. Earlier that day, Laurie notices a silent man wearing pale coveralls and a blank mask. Every time she looks again, he seems to have moved closer. Meanwhile, psychiatrist Dr. Loomis desperately searches for escaped patient Michael Myers. The original film received its British cinema classification in September 1978 and remains officially described as a horror thriller built around strong threat and violence. One of Carpenter's smartest scenes happens before Laurie understands that she is actually in danger. Michael appears far behind her near a hedge, then disappears when she looks again. Nothing dramatic happens. That is the point. The audience knows more than Laurie, creating unbearable tension from an almost empty suburban street. Later, the film delivers the closet confrontation, Loomis's desperate arrival, and the famous ending in which Michael appears to vanish. The mask, the piano theme, the slow camera movements, and the ordinary neighborhood became the blueprint for countless slashers. Yet most imitators missed Carpenter's secret. Halloween works because suspense comes first. Number 7. The Omen, 1976. Imagine discovering that the child you have devoted your life to protecting may be connected to something unimaginably sinister. Gregory Peck plays American diplomat Robert Thorne, whose newborn baby dies shortly after birth. Without telling his wife, he agrees to secretly replace the child with another infant. Years later, strange events begin following young Damien, and Robert discovers that the circumstances surrounding the boy's birth may have been carefully hidden. Richard Donner directs the story with the seriousness of a political thriller, rather than an exaggerated monster movie. The BPFC records the film's original British cinema classification in June 1976 and highlights its strong supernatural threat and violent set pieces. The most famous scene involves photographer Keith Jennings, studying photographs linked to people surrounding Damien. Strange markings seem to predict terrible events before they occur. Suddenly, photographs that looked like ordinary snapshots become warnings. Another brilliant sequence follows Robert into an ancient cemetery, where the truth about Damien's origins becomes impossible to ignore. Jerry Goldsmith's Oscar-winning music adds enormous power, making even quiet scenes feel dangerous. By the ending, Robert must decide whether he believes something that should be impossible. The Omen became a huge success, but its dark religious atmosphere, conspiracy-like mystery, and unforgettable villainous child also guaranteed it permanent cult appeal. Number 6. Carrie, 1976. The real tragedy of this story is that Carrie White does not begin as a monster. Everybody around her helps create the disaster. Sissy Spacek plays an isolated high school student bullied by classmates and controlled by her fanatically religious mother. Carrie eventually discovers she has telekinetic abilities, but for a brief moment, it appears her life may actually improve when she is invited to the senior prom. Brian De Palma makes viewers desperately want that happiness to last. The BPAL-FC's records show the original British cinema classification in November 1976, while modern guidance still identifies the film's intense horror, violence, and disturbing family material. Everyone knows the famous prom sequence, yet its construction remains brilliant. Carrie arrives looking genuinely happy. She dances, she smiles. For once, the room seems to accept her. Then, a cruel prank planned earlier finally happens. De Palma shifts into split screens and strange sound design as humiliation turns into supernatural chaos. The audience understands Carrie's anger even while watching the situation spiral beyond control. Piper Laurie's performance as Carrie's mother adds another level of horror because home offers no safety either. The final dream sequence delivers one last legendary shock. What began as controversial teen horror eventually became one of cinema's most influential stories about bullying, isolation, and revenge. Number 5. Dawn of the Dead, 1978. George Romero looked at the modern shopping mall and apparently thought, "This already looks like the end of civilization." After society begins collapsing under a zombie outbreak, 4 survivors escape by helicopter and eventually discover an enormous shopping center. At first, the mall seems perfect. Food, clothing, tools, weapons, and almost everything else they could possibly need. There is just one problem. The dead keep wandering back. Romero suggests they return because shopping was so deeply programmed into their lives that even after death, the mall still feels familiar. The British cinema release arrived in 1979 in a shortened version that required classification cuts. Decades later, much longer versions became available. The most iconic scenes are often strangely playful. Survivors race through empty stores, try on expensive clothing, eat restaurant food, and temporarily live like millionaires. Then rival bikers invade. The mall turns from sanctuary into battlefield, and the survivors discover that ownership itself has become their weakness. That satire is why Dawn of the Dead survived beyond its shock value. Yes, horror fans loved the makeup effects and action, but underneath everything was an angry joke about consumer culture. Once controversial enough to face heavy classification problems, Romero's sequel became a midnight movie favorite, a home video phenomenon, and one of the most respected cult horror films ever made. Number 4. Alien, 1979. In space, the monster is frightening, but the locked door behind you may be even worse. Ridley Scott begins Alien like a slow science fiction mystery. The commercial spaceship Nostromo is returning to Earth when its crew receives a mysterious transmission from an unknown planet. They investigate, discover an enormous abandoned spacecraft, and bring crew member Kane back aboard after he encounters a strange organism. From that moment, the Nostromo becomes a haunted house floating through space. The BPAL-FC classified the film for British cinemas in June 1979, and its current guidance still emphasizes intense horror, violence, and sustained threat. The dinner table sequence became one of cinema's most famous shocks. The crew believes Kane has recovered. Everyone is relaxed, eating, joking, and preparing to return home. Then something begins happening inside him. The scene works because the actors and audience move from complete relief to total panic almost instantly. Later, the fully grown creature begins hunting the surviving crew members through narrow corridors, while emergency lights and machinery make escape increasingly difficult. Sigourney Weaver's Ripley gradually emerges as the character willing to make the decisions everyone else avoids. The final confrontation turns her into a horror and science fiction icon. Alien eventually became a major franchise, but its claustrophobic first chapter still feels like an expensive cult movie somehow released by a major studio. Number 3. The Shining, 1980. Maybe the Overlook Hotel is haunted, or maybe Jack Torrance simply brought the darkness inside with him. Stanley Kubrick never gives viewers an easy answer. Jack Nicholson plays a struggling writer who accepts a winter caretaker job at an isolated Colorado hotel. His wife Wendy and young son Danny move in with him, unaware that Danny possesses a mysterious psychic ability known as the Shining. When heavy snow cuts the hotel off from civilization, impossible things begin appearing. The BPWebFC's records show the film receiving its British cinema classification in July 1980, while modern guidance continues to note its powerful threat, violence, and disturbing imagery. The movie contains too many famous scenes to choose only one. There are the 2 girls standing in the corridor. There is the elevator opening as Danny's visions become increasingly alarming. There is Jack, sitting at the bar, speaking with someone who should not exist. And, of course, there is the bathroom door sequence, where Wendy realizes the husband she knew has completely disappeared. Kubrick's camera glides through corridors as if the hotel itself is watching the family. Even the architecture seems impossible. Doors appear where rooms should not fit. Hallways feel endless. Background objects mysteriously change positions. Whether those details were intentional clues or simply production quirks has fueled decades of theories. Initial reviews were mixed, but time completely changed the verdict. Today, The Shining is endlessly analyzed, quoted, parodied, and revisited, the exact behavior cult cinema inspires. Number 2. The Exorcist, 1973. Could one horror movie really frighten audiences enough to become a national controversy? In 1973, the answer appeared to be yes. William Friedkin's film follows actress Chris McNeil and her young daughter Regan. After Regan begins behaving strangely, doctors search for a medical explanation. Nothing works. Eventually, Chris turns toward Father Damien Karras, a priest struggling with his own faith. Karras initially searches for rational answers too. That skepticism makes everything that follows more frightening. The B-Flat FC describes The Exorcist as a 1973 horror film built around strong supernatural threat, with Regan's condition becoming progressively more alarming. Contemporary accounts later became inseparable from stories of intense audience reactions and public controversy. The famous bedroom scenes do not rely on one single scare. The room becomes colder. Furniture moves. Regan's appearance changes. Voices appear that seem impossible. Two priests enter believing they understand the ritual, only to discover that the entity seems to understand their weaknesses better than they do. The final confrontation works because Karras's crisis of faith becomes the emotional center of the story. Whatever viewers believe about supernatural events, they understand his guilt and desperation. The film eventually became a huge commercial success and an Academy Award contender, but its reputation still carries the forbidden excitement of something audiences once debated whether people should even be allowed to see. Number 1. The Devils, 1971. If any film deserves the number 1 position on a list about X-rated horror becoming cult history, this may be the most controversial choice of all. Ken Russell's The Devils is not traditional horror. There are no masked killers or wandering monsters. Instead, the monster is mass hysteria. Oliver Reed plays Father Urbain Grandier, a powerful priest attempting to protect the French city of Loudun from political forces that want its defenses destroyed. Meanwhile, Sister Jeanne, played by Vanessa Redgrave, becomes obsessed with Grandier. Her claims eventually help create accusations of witchcraft and possession that spread through the city. The movie mixes politics, religion, fear, desire, and public manipulation in deliberately provocative ways. Its censorship history became legendary. The B-Flat FC records a cut British cinema version in 1971, while its own historical case study notes that the film also received an X rating in America before further editing was undertaken, in pursuit of an R rating. The most famous sequences take place inside the convent, as supposed supernatural possession becomes public spectacle. But Russell keeps asking an uncomfortable question. Are these people witnessing evil, or are powerful institutions creating a convenient explanation for political destruction? That question is why The Devils still feels dangerous. For decades, different versions circulated while fans demanded fuller restorations. The censorship itself became part of the movie's mythology. What authorities once tried to reduce became exactly what cult audiences wanted to discover. So which of these once controversial horror movies actually deserved its dangerous reputation, and which one was simply misunderstood by nervous censors? From The Wicker Man and Suspiria to The Exorcist and The Devils, the strangest thing is that films once treated like problems are now treated like classics. Drop your number 1 pick in the comments, hit like, subscribe, and stay with us for more forgotten, forbidden, and controversial movies from cinema history.